Welcome to Snipe Hunting, a podcast where I explore non-dualism, spiritual transformation, and the changes that these things have brought into the rest of my life. The story of snipe hunting is that some time ago I was struck by this strange image, a metaphor, a comparison, and we'll get into the details of that shortly. But the thing I'd like you to know right now is that more than any idea I've ever had, this thing just blossomed in my brain. It became this interesting, important, fascinating mess. I thought maybe it would become a book. I've got a rough draft of that book mostly completed. It feels important, though, to really sift through this slowly and carefully. I'd like to go through the act of sifting through it myself by reading the rough draft, but more than that, it'd be great to hear how people receive this image. And that brings us to where we are now. This podcast is a presentation of this rough draft that I've created. You could think of this thing as an audiobook presented in parts. But the whole idea is still in flux. And I'd like to inject a little bit of you into this thing. I'd like to know what parts resonate and what parts lose you. I'd love to hear the things you're thinking about as you listen, and I'd love to hear the questions that you have. So wherever you found this recording, please leave some thoughts or questions or criticism, if you can. And as this podcast evolves, I'll not only incorporate what you have to say into this podcast, but I'll also use your thoughts to shape the final form of this book. So let's begin. Today, we explore the introduction and reflection number 1 from chapter 1 of Snipe Hunting by Auden Campbell. There are books which are finely constructed arguments, sculpted out of rationality itself. These works place a high premium on relevance and have an easy-to-define thesis. They move upward, building from the ground and reaching for the sky. If they had a setting that best represented them, it would be a philosophy lecture. An aged professor stands before the patiently waiting students. This book is not like that at all. This book is, hopefully, more like a poem that has established a route between the mind and the heart. Will progress in a spiraling, perhaps, occasionally surprising manner. Books like I hope this one is, move outward, and they excavate the ground beneath our feet. If this book had a setting, it would be a campfire. You see some favorite people and shove them over to make room for you on a log, and you talk about important things as you begin to toast a marshmallow on a long stick. It occurred to me, as I was writing this book, that a dilemma that's at work here is that philosophical books, that other kind of story, they have a natural starting point. They have theses or definitions or explanations for why the topic is important. The things I want to talk to you about, they don't really have a beginning. And there were dozens of different beginnings I could have chosen. At the end of the day, though, we can only truly start in one place. And so the question for me, where do I begin? Dear reader, we've only known each other for half a page or so. I realize it's early in our relationship for me to be coming at you with a request. I'm not in general quite this needy usually, but at this time, It's kind of needed. So the thing I would like to ask you is to be open to something which will unfold slowly. In some ways, difficulties with patience are a symptom of the times we are living in. We have been trained to be not very good at waiting, at beginning slowly. Sometimes, like in this book, beginning slowly is the best way to begin. We'll circle back to other places that could have been a starting point, and they'll fill out some central ideas in a whole new way. Eventually, we'll even get to that basic idea that maybe we should be careful about viewing the world in such a black and white way. If I had to boil these words down, and I wouldn't want to, that would be my central idea. We ought to be careful about viewing the world in such a black and white way. Eventually, we'll try on some possibilities that give us some reasons to move away entirely from the kind of mindset that says there is a single correct place to start anything at. Eventually, our form and function will come together. So hang in there. It's going to be worth it. Reflection number 1. I was an unlikely Boy Scout. I was not the sort of 13-year-old who would normally go in for the high-stakes world of earning merit badges or tying knots. Nor was I particularly good at running, jumping, bravado, or machismo. I was already suspicious of uniforms and people that would want to look like everybody else, and I was enough of an offspring of Massachusetts liberals to be weary of flag-waving, sermonizing, and vaguely right-wing politics. At the time, of course, I could not have expressed any of those ideas in words. They were more intuitions than clearly defined beliefs, and ultimately, none of them ended up mattering much. The thing that outweighed all of those other considerations, the selling point on the Boy Scouts for me, was simply the possibility that I could escape my boring 1980s life. 1 out of every 4 weekends, we would go camping. 2.5 days of minimal supervision in the most beautiful spaces I could imagine. My status as a divorced kid was a growing reality in the 80s, but it hadn't deeply touched yet Troop 811 in Brea, California, where I was then living with my mom. They didn't always exactly know what to do with me or her. If I'd had a dad living in the state, there would have been some sort of social pressure for him to join us at least occasionally. But Dad, he was still back in Massachusetts, and this meant that I was free on those weekends. A few years later, I would read Lord of the Flies in school. That book would capture something about my experiences as a Boy Scout camping. There was something primal about those times, something archetypal. There was no one around with enough wisdom, experience, or initiation to be able to focus these things in a healthy and life-giving direction. Don't get me wrong. Most of this ritual wasn't much worse than simply banal, and the lessons I learned were sometimes important ones. But a true council of elders could have made it into something so much more. And honestly, if I'd been more attentive, worked harder, I also could have gotten more out of it. Now, the worst of all this was the snipe hunt, though I never realized it at the time. Memories of the snipe hunt are things I've carried with me across all these decades. I've thought more about the snipe hunts, in fact, than so many of the other more frequent events in my scouting life. But only recently have I realized not only that it was the worst of it, a sort of signpost for the ugly shadow of the whole Boy Scout thing, only recently have I discovered how intense the feelings I still have about it are. The more time recently I've spent thinking about it, the more intense I find my reactions to be. In fact, I've learned that my history with the snipe hunt is symbolic of something bigger. It's an icon, a microcosm, a way of explaining some things much larger and later in my life than Boy Scouts. These are things that otherwise I think I'd have a real difficulty trying to express. So I'd like to begin by telling you about the snipe hunt. I would like to share with you the things the snipe hunt can express that would be so hard to get at in any other way. And I'd like to invite you to occupy a seat backstage in my mind as I try to unpack this weird and powerful constellation of emotions that has been blossoming out of my reflections. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Not only am I getting carried away, but maybe a little bit grandiose too. Let's take this one step at a time. I'd like to tell you some more about snipe hunts and what they actually are. This is how it went down. There's one particular snipe hunt that sticks out in my mind. I'd like to tell you that I was a part of many of them. I'd like to say that I began as a victim of them and soon switched over to collaborator. And honestly, I think that those things are true. But if I were to be completely real with you, I can't say for sure that I was involved in a bunch of them. And in a way, this is even stranger to me. I have such intense feelings and thoughts about the process, but I can only say for sure that I ever went on just the one. Let's park that little diversion for now. We will get back to it eventually. The question of what is true and what is important, these are central to what I want to do here. The idea that I can't tell you for sure just how many I went on, that's not inconsequential. So we'll make some plans to return to that territory. But for now, let's get to talking about the one that I can really be clear with you about. It was dark, and we were in the middle of nowhere. The campground was somewhere within half an hour of Orange County, California, the little suburban area I spent my middle school years in. I was introduced to the topic of snipe hunts by one of the first best friends I ever had. We'll call him Don Truehill here, but that wasn't his name. Don was a bit of a paradox, but he was more of a force of nature. He was the first person I knew who made it to second base with a girl. He was the first person I knew who tried drugs. He was the first person I knew who listened to the cool alt rock that would be a staple of my adolescence. He introduced me to California's world-famous K-Rock and tried to convince me to ditch school so we could go where they were filming a YouTube video. The band was putting on a concert from a rooftop. That would all come later, though. In our middle school years, Don would do things like spend the night at my house and convince me we should set the heads of our 80s era G.I. Joe action figures on fire by holding them by their feet over our lit gas stove. There was a real Eddie Haskell vibe to Don. He could read social situations and take on an "aw shucks Mrs. Campbell" attitude when asked if he'd been up to no good. Don leveraged these skills to become patrol leader of the Fighting Rats. He explained the whole thing to me. So there's this made-up animal called a snipe, and the thing we do is We tell the new kid how cool snipes are and how we can only find them in this one park that we just happen to be in, and they're only out at night. So we all get to be walking away from the campsite, and we get far away from it. Don had a smile that would light up his whole face. I could tell by the way the corner of his eyes crinkled that the punchline was coming. Then, one by one, or a couple people at a time, we all come up with an excuse to come back to camp. And we leave the new guy out there all alone. I lacked the courage or moral intelligence or something to identify what this was at the time. In fact, I've spent most of my life, a bit over 50 years now, failing to think very deeply about the whole ritual. It took me getting here to learn some of these things about it. One of the things that I learned is that this is pretty rough, unfair, wrong. Dare I say that it's outright evil? Yeah. I don't use black and white pronouncements very often, and in a way they're contrary to the whole point of these words I'm writing. But the snipe hunt, I'm going to call this one evil. That brings us to the end of reflection number 1 in chapter number 1 of snipe hunting. Eventually this might become a book that will become available at major outlets. If you're interested in exploring more of my writing and thoughts about contemplation, you can find several books I've already written on Amazon. You can also look up some meditations I have collected at thefaithingproject.wordpress.com. I'm going to do my best to get these reflections out one a week, so you can look wherever you found this reflection to find some more. This has been Jeff. Thanks for joining me today. And please do leave some thoughts, reflections, and comments on this opening section. This brings us to the end of Reflection 1 of Chapter 1 in Snipe Hunts by Jeff Campbell. Each week, we'll close our podcast with a contemplative practice connected to the specific reading and the overarching themes of the book. So stay tuned for that. For these first few podcasts, we're going to be focusing on apophatic meditation. Apophatic meditation is a process that takes a certain phrase and explores the fact that in some ways this phrase could be true, and in other ways it might be untrue. More specifically, apophatic meditation begins with an affirmation. For example, God is love. It moves on to a negation. For example, God is not love. The final step is to negate the negation. For example, God is not love. Typically, these steps are done with different parts of the breath. In the first case, we could inhale and think, God is love. We could exhale and think, God is not love. We could inhale and think, God is not love. We can then exhale, drink the silence, and prepare for a new sentence to apply the affirmation, negation, and negation of the negation too. A few words are in order about that last step. A sentence like, God is not love, can be a little bit confusing. It's worth wondering just what is meant by that. The simplest answer to that question is lots of things. A more helpful and specific answer will go something like this. We negate the negation as a way of identifying that this world is not as simple as a thing is this way or it isn't that way. In so many ways, God is love. And in so many ways, God is not love. But that third sentence is necessary because there are so many ways that neither of the sentences is true, and there are so many ways that both of them are. Before we begin, a few words are in order about the sentences we'll be using today. One of the things we'll be returning to in this podcast is questions about who we really are. We have this tendency to go looking for our deepest self and settle for answers that are not worthy of that divine nature. We settle for the possibility that we're defined by our roles, jobs, or beliefs. It's like going out and looking for an amazing animal and finding yourself just abandoned in the dark. You're not getting what you came for. None of these roles truly define us. In the practice that follows, I'm going to invite you to consider various aspects of yourself. We'll take 30 seconds to bring that aspect of who we are to our mind. Then we'll engage those 3 sentences, affirming that aspect as defining our identity, negating that aspect, and then negating the negation. I'm sure this all sounds more confusing than it actually is. It's all going to make sense after we do the first couple run-throughs. We'll go through 5 different aspects of ourselves, and where we first contemplate that aspect of our lives. Then we'll go through the 3 phrases for apophatic meditation, and at the very end, we'll return to these 5 sentences, only doing the 3 sentences, the affirmation, the negation, and the negation of the negation. Are you ready? Let's begin. Find yourself settling into your body and become aware of your breath. Go ahead and leave your stresses and worries. If you wish, when we're done, you'll be welcome to pick them back up. We'll start by considering the roles we play to our family members. Perhaps you're a father or son, or a mother or a daughter. Maybe you're a widow or single person, a fiancé, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a best friend. Think about all the different ways you're connected to the people you love. Inhale, thinking, I am the roles I play within my family. Exhale, thinking, I am not the roles I play to my family. Inhale, thinking, I am not the roles I play to my family. Now, bring to mind the things you do, the job and title you have, the school you attend, the classes you study. Think about your hobbies. Think about the things you have to do. Think about the things you want to do. Inhale, thinking, I am defined by the things I do. Exhale, thinking, I am not defined by the things I do. Inhale, thinking, I am not the things I do. Now, consider all the things you believe: spirituality, religion, politics. Think about the things that you believe that you can put into words, and think about the things you believe that you have no words for. Consider the things that others have taught you, and bring to mind the sorts of things that you've had to learn on your own. Hold on to the things you learned years ago, and bring to mind the things that you're learning right now. Inhale, thinking, I am the things I believe. Exhale, thinking, I am not the things I believe. Inhale, thinking, I am not the things I believe. Now, let's turn to our feelings. You might consider the various feelings you've felt over just the last 24 hours. It might be helpful to quickly run through in your mind this last day that you've lived, and keep a mental list of all the different feelings that went through you at that time. Inhale, thinking, I am the feelings that I feel. Exhale, thinking, I am not the feelings that I feel. Inhale, thinking, I am not the feelings I feel. Finally, consider the thoughts that enter your head. Some of these thoughts might be helpful. Others might not be. Many of them might surprise you and come without you looking for them. You might pay attention to the very thoughts that are occurring to you now as you sit in this silence. Inhale, thinking, I am the thoughts that I think. Exhale, thinking, I am not the thoughts that I think. Inhale, thinking, I am not the thoughts I think. We'll now recap those 5 aspects of ourselves, focusing on just the apophatic meditation part and not giving any time to bringing these portions of ourselves to mind. Inhale, I am the roles I play. Exhale, I am not the roles I play. Inhale, I am not the roles I play. Exhale. Inhale, I am the things I do. Exhale, I am not the things I do. Inhale, I am not the things I do. Exhale. Inhale, I am the things I believe. Exhale, I am not the things I believe. Inhale, I am not the things I believe. Exhale. Inhale, I am the feelings I have. Exhale, I am not the feelings I have. Inhale, I am not the feelings that I have. Exhale. Inhale, I am the thoughts that I think. Exhale, I am not the thoughts that I think. Inhale, I am not the thoughts that I think. This concludes our podcast and spiritual practice. Thank you so much for joining us today, and be on the lookout for part 2 of Snipe Hunting by Auden Campbell. We'll see you next time. Please leave lots of thoughts and comments and help us shape just the direction this whole thing is moving in.